to the group with tears being shed, right?
Yeah.
And so it's showing up and being faithful with the people that God has given you in the group. That's how transformation happens. That's how relationship.
Hey everyone, welcome to Represent Jesus Well, an RCC podcast where we're all about helping you represent Jesus well in your community, in your family, and beyond that. My name is Sam. I'm hosting the podcast. I'm also a pastor here at Ripon Community Church, and I'm really excited because we have a brand new guest today, somebody who's never sat down here before and is actually like a year into being on staff here. I'm here with Adam Malika, Pastor Adam Malika, pastor of discipleship here at RCC. How's it going?
It's going. Been here a year. Feels weird. My family and I have gotten readjusted to small town life, which is good.
So give us a little background. Like, tell us where you came from, how you ended up, why you even chose here. But let's start with your family and background for a moment.
Yeah, my family and I, my wife and I are both from Waupaca, about an hour north. So we actually grew up playing against Ripon in middle school and high school sports, which is interesting. We got married, 10 years ago now, back in 2014. Spent 2 years as an intern as a middle school pastor at our church in Waupaca. Then ended up, after graduating college from Stevens Point undergrad, went down to Milwaukee, worked at a church down there for 3 years in children's ministry, 4 years in small group ministry, while completing my master's in biblical counseling. So I have that as well. And then, my wife and I, just over the last 2 years in Milwaukee, felt like God was calling us somewhere else, had applied to a few jobs, got turned down for a job here and there. And same day we found out I got turned down for a job, saw the job for Ripon Community Church, and asked ourselves, are we excited about a church in a small town? And we love it so far.
Tell me a little bit about that. So you went from a really big city.
Not really big.
In Wisconsin mentality, Milwaukee's pretty big. Yeah. We don't get bigger than that, unfortunately. Whatever you want to call it. Milwaukee is a pretty big city, and like lots of people. And what was that like? What were some of the biggest things that you experienced that were different between living there to living here in a small town?
Target.
I mean, that's legit. Okay, tell me more.
We had just proximity to so many things, so many people. There was a grocery store within 5 minutes, 5 different grocery stores within 5 minutes of us. So just adjusting to lack of accessibility to things. It's been interesting.
Yeah, we've got one.
Yeah, you've got one. We've got one. Not you.
Yeah, we all have one grocery store. This is great. Okay, that's really interesting, like the proximity of everything. Yeah. You also went from a place that I'm guessing was, what is the word for it? Where people are coming and going regularly, leaving and showing up. Transient. Yeah. So tell me more what it was like to live in a transient place. Because we're going to get into this in a minute, like why this is important, what we're going to be talking about. But I want to hear more about that for a second.
I mean, from a pastoral, from like a church perspective, there were new people coming in the doors all the time. We had different campuses. So college students, people moving to the city, moving away from the city, that sort of thing. And there were so many times where it'd be like 3 months later and be like, I haven't seen this person in a long time. Where'd they go? And they moved across the country without telling anybody in the church. They just up and moved. So Milwaukee, it was very transient. Friends came and went. I think Devin and I had, 2 or 3 different iterations of community groups over a 2-year season, and probably had 20 plus couples in and out of our community group.
That's really wild.
Yeah.
It's hard to even fathom. For me, just living up here in a smaller town and growing up in a small town and doing ministry for the last 14 years here in a small town. So it makes me want to ask a couple questions. And so just really quickly as we talk, the purpose of this discussion is to really talk about this idea of community.
Yeah.
And community is a bit of a buzzy word where it's easy to say, I want community, or I think community is important, or we really need to figure out how to do community well. Like it's a verb, do community. I don't know how that works, right? It's not necessarily a verb. But it's a thing. Yep. It's a thing that we experience and spend time with and wrestle with a little bit. And I want to get even further because when you talk about community, I think the first practical thing we are thinking is a community group.
Sure.
So can you just talk, like you're in charge of community groups and leading the leaders and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Tell me more about what a community group is for a moment.
Sure. A community group is, I would say, specific to a church. It's different. It's not a group in the community of Ripon, right? It's a group that is I don't want to say facilitated, but is organized by us as a church, that people who come on a Sunday morning, they can hear about these community groups and they can get plugged into them. And what they are is they are weekly, every other week, some cadence of meeting on a regular basis, where you come together with other people that also attend church. Maybe in the future, some people who don't attend church could be invited. We'd be open to that for sure. But come together throughout the week for about an hour and a half, discuss just spend time together. How was your week? How you doing? How are the kids? That sort of thing, catching up. Another section of that gathering would just be discussing, talking about what people learn from the sermon, how they feel like God is working in their lives as a result of the sermon that was preached or whatever study that a group might be going through. And then we always say 30 minutes for prayer, but we all know prayer gets, oh, crap, it's 5 minutes left.
It's
Any
like
prayer requests? Let's close up.
really quick.
But yeah, really just being with one another, leaning into what God is teaching the church at RCC, and then praying with and for one another. Form the basis, the foundation of community groups.
So I wanted to ask you, like, your picture of that, because I think when people think of community, generally speaking, I think they think of a bunch of different things. They think of the town they live in.
Yep.
They think of family.
Yep.
They think of school pride, right?
Yep.
There's like a school that they're maybe oriented around, whether it's collegiate or high school or what have you. And they don't, and maybe they think of neighbors, right? Like who your neighbors are. But I don't think that the majority of people living in a community anywhere in the United States would think of community as this really nitty gritty, show up at a specific time, talk about hard things, encourage one another, talk about what the Bible says about certain things. They wouldn't get that. But what I want to ask a little bit is why can't we live on an island?
Sure. I'll speak to quickly just what you just said. Speaking from personal experience, if I don't have a structure to have a more in-depth conversation with you or my wife, or it's just not going to happen. We're going to talk about the sport. We're going to talk about sports. We're going to talk about the weather. We're going to talk about jobs,
right now. The weather is amazing right now.
It's soon to be cold, but at just default, we end up just having small talk, right?
Yeah.
So through having structured time, it helps us go a little bit deeper.
Why would you want to go deeper? Isn't it nice just to, I'm playing devil's advocate here, obviously, but like, why would you want to actually dig into this hard stuff? Isn't it nice enough to just talk about the weather and sports?
Page 1 of the Bible, right? Like, we are created to be in community with one another, to be known. Says God created us in his image, right? And God is 3 persons in one, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And we were created to be in community, both with God, but also with other people. We're not to do this life alone.
Okay. Yes. Thinking about a couple of different directions we could go from this. I want that.
Yeah.
But I don't often know the cost to get there. So
what do you mean?
What I mean by that is I want to experience really rich community.
Sure.
But I don't often realize that there are pieces of myself I'm going to have to give away, or I'm going to have to open up in order to experience it.
Yep.
And I think I'll often talk to people where they say they feel alone. Yep. You just talked about how being known really matters. And I think that's a big pain point for a lot of people is I feel alone. And they'll say, I want community. I want this thing. I want people close to me. Right. But there's a barrier there. Mm-hmm. Why, in your assessment, and we're just riffing here, why don't people cross that barrier? Why aren't they aware of that reality?
The reality of wanting to be known?
No, the reality that it takes more in order to be known. Like, why? Like, I think people are like, I don't have anybody that's a friend. Yeah. Where's the disconnect there? Do you know what I mean?
Maybe I'm showing my millennial here.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
2007, the iPhone was invented, right?
Yeah.
And so then boredom went out the window, and we are more connected than we've ever been, but also more disconnected than we've ever been. And so I remember a couple of years ago, I was chatting with a friend, and he was saying that his daughter didn't want to get her driver's license at 16.
Sure.
She wanted to stay home. She didn't get it till she was 18, I think 2 years later, because she would rather hang out with her friends on Snapchat than actually hang out with them in person, right? Wild. That was not available to us when we were younger,
No.
right? Or past generations.
No.
And so I think we have this idea, we think we're connected because we're connected through social media, or we can FaceTime people across the country if we live away from our family, from friends, things like that. But we're actually more disconnected. And I think COVID was a novelty, right?
Yeah.
2 weeks, it was really cool to use Zoom. And then after that, it was just exhausting.
Yeah.
So sure, we were more connected, meaning we're more frequently talking to one another, but we weren't actually, I don't think, seeing one another or spending quality time with one another.
Okay. I see that. And I want to go into the digital stuff for just a second, because
Sure.
I think it's such a novel thing for us right now.
Yep.
As you talk to people that are engaging in community, or as you talk to just anybody, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I have my phone right here, right? Like there's a reality to my phone being in front of me.
We're on a podcast.
It's got my notes, all these different pieces. It all lives there. It's also how I connect with people often, with text messages, etc.
Yep.
What's different about an in-person conversation
Sure.
than that's vulnerable and real and honest, like Hardy, right?
Yeah.
Talks about the real stuff. What's different about that than when you text somebody something?
I mean, I was talking with some friends the other day, and one of them was going through a hard situation, and another friend in that conversation hadn't seen that thread yet.
Oh gosh.
So he just, he just sent a picture of, like, he burnt his thumb or something.
Yeah.
And it was mid-conversation in this thread that we were having with our other friend, and he sent right after, he's like, oh, probably not a good time to send that, I suppose. And we're like, you're fine, like, you didn't see it.
Yeah.
But that's the difference, right? Is you can interject into somebody's life and think that you're not bothered. All of the traditional dynamics of, like, human conversation are out the window. It'd be like somebody popping in the door right now, interrupting us, like, hey, look at this cool meme, or look at this cool story that I just saw.
Yeah.
That'd be weird, and we'd be mad at them right now.
Yeah.
Right? But we do that so often, don't even think about it with a text message. But there's something when people physically get together, and I would argue it's okay to have, we're talking about community groups, it's okay to have community groups meet in the church, but there's something about inviting people into your home as somebody who hosts people for a community group, or going to somebody else's home. There's just this rawness that's there. Getting back to what we used to do before we were distracted with smartphones, you know?
This is really true.
Yeah.
So I'm even thinking of, like, Facebook comments and Twitter. Like, you hop into somebody's inflammatory comment and like get angry about it, and all of a sudden there's no understanding of where this person comes from or what they experience on a day-to-day life.
And then you get a caricature of a person, you don't actually know the person.
Yeah.
I was just recently listening to a podcast, actually, and they were talking about two like leaders of two different militaries, two different countries, right? And they were at odds with each other. And then they got together in a room and talked about what was hard in their life with one another. And all of a sudden they agreed. They made agreements to, like, I don't know if it was a ceasefire or whatever it was, but they had been at each other's heads for, I think, years. And then they actually got to meet each other in a room for the first time. And all of the tension just kind of calmed down a little bit.
Yeah.
They didn't have caricatures of each other, right? They actually got to know the person in front of them.
Okay, so this really gets down to a thing that I think is really powerful for this podcast, the mission of our church, representing Jesus well.
Yep.
How does this act, that we're calling community, but really we mean, like, very physical, very in-person, very together sort of community, how does that foster a way of, or create a way in you of representing Jesus well? How does that form it? Like, we're kind of talking about it right now. But let's riff on that for a second.
For sure.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's the I don't want to say cliche because it's a Bible verse, but, like, the iron sharpens iron. Yeah. Right? There is this reality that when we get together with people, we say things that we don't mean to sometimes, and it ruffles people's feathers. And then if we're in a healthy community, there's space to talk about that. And, hey, you hurt me when you said that. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say it that way. I'm sorry that it hurt you. There's this ruffling of feathers. There's this deep conversation that happens where you get to see something from another's perspective. I think so many times the temptation is for community groups to turn into Bible studies. And I always tell people, I tell our leaders, our community groups are not Bible studies. We just happen to study the Bible in them. And the reason for that is because we can have all the Bible knowledge in the world, right? And still not be formed into a person who loves other people, a person of love, right? But when it comes to community group, like when we're talking about reflection, discussion, application of a sermon or whatever teaching we're going through, my hope is that most of our discussion questions are geared around people's personal experience with whatever the topic might be.
Yeah.
Because I found that when people share their personal experience with others, the other people in the room, their empathy grows. And they're like, oh, I never thought about it from that perspective, from that side of things. And so when you are when you willingly enter into a room with other people. When you force yourself. When you force yourself, when you step out of your comfort zone to do that, if that's not normal for you, you get to hear things from another perspective that you wouldn't be able to do on your own, no matter how much deep thinking about a certain topic you did.
So that makes a lot of sense. It actually makes me think the reason that we have the mission Represent Jesus Well is because it's a kind of guiding principle, not a set of like rules and regulations. It's like it's one guiding thing that multiple people can have different perspectives on.
For sure.
And what I think is interesting is you can walk into a room with a bunch of people, similar age, life experience, or maybe vastly different, but all of a sudden you find out you disagree about a whole bunch of different things, and you had no idea.
Exactly.
And now the value in that room is not on being right; it's being with.
For sure.
And actually experiencing community and understanding that, you know what, I think I'm right about everything, but I'm probably not. So let's be honest about that fact. And let's then expand and learn, and iron sharpens iron, and get closer to right because we're together.
And it's what are we unifying under?
Yeah, totally.
Right? We're unifying under the fact that we're the body of Christ. So racial, demographic, social, economical, political divisions aside, like those aren't what identify us. What identifies us is that we are following Jesus together, trying to haphazardly and lots of fits and starts represent him well.
Yeah. You know? I was thinking about this a while back. There's a statistic out there that goes something like this, that the most socioeconomic the way to track someone's most significant ability to move socioeconomically.
Sure.
So go from one set of class socioeconomically to another, can go down to one statistic, and that statistic is whether or not they attend a church.
Sure.
Because the church is one of the few institutions left in the world that actually mixes socioeconomic realities. And because you're just in proximity to people, and that's never a reason to like attend a church or go to a community
Hoping
group.
to.
But it shows something that's true. And the goal isn't to grow socioeconomically. The goal is to be around people that are pushing you, informing you, and helping guide you. And I think that's really powerful. Just being a part of a church does that, informs you, and just by being around other people. But this is a more intentional, more on purpose sort of thing.
For sure.
So let's talk about one other aspect of
if
this.
I can say one thing on that.
Please.
There's this guy above my pay grade. I don't even know his first name. I know his last name is Dunbar. He's got this rule of something.
Sure.
When he talks about community. And he talks about your inner circle being this like 1 to 5 people that you're intimately acquainted with. Like they know your good side and your bad side. They know the side that you present to people and your, what some people call the shadow side, right? They know everything about you, sometimes know you better than yourself. Now, we are very individualistic in our culture, and not everybody has even one person that they can share those things with. But as a general rule, human beings have 1 to 5 intimates. And then from 5 to 15, that's where we would consider the community groups. Like, these are my people that I do life with. And sure, we might take breaks if things get busy, that sort of thing. But these are the people that I would consider my friends, right? That I come to for prayer. I'm maybe not sharing everything with, but I'm diving into scripture with them. I'm spending time with them. We're maybe deciding to move closer to one another in the neighborhood to do like block parties, that sort of thing. Really just doing life with one another. And then there is, I don't remember what he called the third level, but it's under 150 people, which research, I guess, has shown that you can't really know more than 150 people. But I think that would just be called like your church community, right?
Sure.
And that's actually what most small local churches are size-wise, is about 150 to 200 people, where people can know everybody, that sort of thing. And then there's the fourth level, which is anything above 150. And that I think he called like your tribe,
Okay.
which is like your political affiliation, your sports team, the community you're a part of, that sort of thing. But understanding these levels, kind of just, it's provided me with a framework of like, I don't need, in the past, I've had this dream of community,
Yeah.
of community within the church, right?
Yeah.
Like if we're not confessing sin, if we're not praying over our darkest secrets or seeing deliverance from sins, then that's not true biblical community, right?
Yeah.
But the research shows that's only meant to be done with like 1 to 5 people.
Yeah.
One, because of a safety reason, but also just that's what we're comfortable with as human beings. So it's alleviated the burden that I've placed, the weight that I've placed on community groups that they weren't meant to fulfill.
Yeah, let's dig into
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So there's this quote that we've talked about before. It's from
Yeah.
Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I can't quote it verbatim, but he has this book about community.
Yep.
First couple chapters are great, and then the rest of it's like all these random details of like how he wanted it to do to happen in his
You should probably
context.
explain. Have you explained before in the past the context of what he's talking about community?
Go ahead.
I don't remember all the details. I know you shared them with me. I've read the book Life Together.
Yeah.
But he was essentially forming
a new church.
a new church, but it was like a retreat
Yes.
almost during World War II.
Yeah, he was doing some crazy stuff, especially in the lead up to World War II.
Yeah.
And then once World War II really got underway, it got really kind of dicey for
Yep.
him. But anyways,
Go read Life Together.
Yeah,
if you want more details.
It's a great book. But here's the thing. He says basically, as soon as you have, everybody has like a wish dream, he calls
Sure.
it. This idea of what an idealized form of community looks like.
Yep.
And once you have it in your head that this is what you think it should be, you've suddenly killed the community.
Yep, you've ruined it.
You've absolutely ruined it.
Yep.
Yeah. So you just talked about like a wish dream, like an idea of, hey,
Yep.
I wanted a community to be this really just hearty, in depth. We just know each other so well. Deepest, darkest secrets, biggest
Yep.
encouragement. We're showing up at 2 a.m. for each other, that
Yep.
kind of stuff, right? And that's his idea, but it's not feasible. And
Yep.
once we put those expectations on it, it dies.
Yep. Exactly.
How have you wrestled with that? Because you
Yeah.
talked about it, like I've come away from it, but what practically
Sure.
has changed about your view of community? And then
Yeah.
preview, we're going into the Milwaukee to Ripon
Yeah.
conversation of that too.
For
So
sure.
I'm curious.
Yeah, I think I don't expect, in my own experience, I don't expect people in my community group to be my best friends, or to use Dunbar's rule, the intimate people
Yeah.
in my life. However, out of some of my community groups that I've experienced over the years, I have had people get to that level of relationship with me. That sounds weird. Get to that level, like they've achieved something. They haven't. I've opened up
Did they get
to
a
them
prize?
more. I've trusted them more, with more of myself through relationship over time and conversations. But the community group has really served those, however, I would say 12 to 20 people, depending on the group size, has served as that sort of, hey, we're sick and we need some meals. Can you guys run those over to us? Or I remember when my wife and I had our child, when we had Cora,
Yeah.
it was immediate, like, how can we help? Can we bring you guys ice cream? That sort of thing. When we did foster care many years back, it was an emergency placement. We had a friend that was just like, I'm going to run a Target for you. I'm going to pick up whatever you need. Don't worry about money right now. Like, we'll figure that out later. But those same people, some of them were people that I was a lot closer with, but a lot of them were just people in my community group that I got to know over time in conversation. So it's sort of both and, to
Yeah.
answer your question. Through community groups, we get to know people deeper. That's just going to happen through spending time with them. The goal is not that they don't go to a community group and seek out your next best friend, right? That's not the goal.
Because that's the wish dream, right? Like
That's
the
wish
thing
dream.
that's going to not
right?
happen.
That may
because-
happen. God may give you that sort of relationship through community group, but that's not the goal. The goal
Yeah.
of community group is to have this support system, to be intentionally placing yourself with brothers and sisters in Christ to learn and apply what God's teaching us currently,
Yeah. Okay, this is really good.
Yeah.
I'm having fun with this. Because now there's the aspect for you specifically, you've experienced this, and this is just my interpretation, question, guess at what it is. So you've gone from Milwaukee, where it's a very transient culture, which we already talked about.
Sure.
So people are coming and going, and they're often not living near family.
Yep.
So when they step into that community group, it almost becomes a second family.
Yes.
Like, oh,
Very
we
much
rely on each other for everything.
Very much so.
Now you've moved to Ripon.
Yep.
Where family is often around.
Yep.
It's actually, maybe they even moved back to Ripon.
We moved here. Part of us moving here was to be an hour closer to our family.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
now you're closer. You get to enjoy time together on the weekends. It's not as common to be like, hey, we're just having some people over. It's not as common to do that sort of a thing. How has that been hard?
Personally, I don't know if it's been hard.
Sure.
But as a church,
Yeah.
right, trying to get community groups off the ground, there's less of a felt need for a community group because people, especially in a smaller town, there's not as much transience, and so people have their not community group but their community. They have it pretty solidified. Those 5 to 15, maybe 30 people, they have those people solidified as their support system. So there's not as much of a felt need for getting into a community group. So that's just been hard as a church, trying to increase the desire, I guess you could say, or felt need for people to be in one. You know.
Yeah. So off of that, that doesn't mean there isn't a need.
For sure.
And so if you were to articulate that need for a moment, and we can kind of brainstorm together for a moment.
Yeah.
What would you say that felt
Sure.
need is, or that need that maybe is felt but not very easily put into words for people?
Yeah. I'd probably ask a person who they're surrounding themselves with.
Yeah.
Right? Because oftentimes we become like the people we hang out with most, right? And this isn't to negate relationships or degrade other relationships with people that aren't believers. I'm not saying that. But if you are a follower of Jesus, you want to become more like Jesus, and you're not surrounding yourself with other people who want that same thing for their lives, you're fighting an uphill battle, right?
Yeah.
But it's by surrounding yourself with people who are chasing after this, representing Jesus well. It's by surrounding yourself with people like that your growth, I don't want to say is going to skyrocket. It's going to be more steady, you know?
Yeah, it's almost like it's a few degrees different.
Yep.
And
for sure.
those few degrees over years make a massive difference.
And please hear me. This isn't to say get rid of those other relationships.
Of course
keep
not.
those, right? Part of representing Jesus well is being in the community with other people,
Mm-hmm.
so that other people might come to know Jesus through our representing him, right? But are you also surrounding yourself with people who want the same thing as you?
Yeah.
You know?
And even, I'll say this, a couple of pieces here. Our community group has, there's more kids than adults.
Yep. You're overrun.
It is just a mass chaos most times. And sometimes we talk about things that we're supposed to talk about. Sometimes we just don't get there, which is the reality, right? It's not a Bible study. It's a group that often studies the Bible or does study the Bible, but it informs the guiding of their discussion. But what I've loved is actually that exact thing in the stage of life we're in right now, where there are kids running around everywhere. I love watching my kids talk to the other adults or the other kids, but the other adults especially, because they just have these other, I have 3 sons, so these are guys that are thinking about different things. Like one's making like a potato spud launcher thing and talking to my son about how to do it. And I'm like, I don't want you to do this, but I'm so glad he's learning this stuff or whatever. Like there's these kinds of things that you don't expect. And you get to place yourself in that position where you have these kinds of conversations and your kids grow up and they experience that. So I think that's really powerful and more needed than we think. And I think more possible than we think. Yeah. So maybe the thing is, it's not that we need it to like survive. It's that we that it's possible, and it's so much richer when we have it.
I've heard it said we don't need other people to survive. Like we can get by on our own, right? But if we want to thrive and if we want to be healthy, then we need other people. And speaking of kids, I don't know if it was research or what it was. I heard that I think it was statistic. It's like a research and some statistics on whether or not children stay in the church long term. And one of the highest, most important factors for whether or not a kid stays in the church after they leave home is whether or not they had other adult figures in their lives besides their parents speaking into their life.
Isn't that crazy?
So your kids are getting influence from the other adults in your community group that are pursuing after this goal of representing Jesus well. And whether you see it or not, that's forming them and has a deep impact on who they become.
Yeah, and it's messy.
And it's
so which I want to keep on getting at because there's this idea that it should be like this really profound conversation, and it's not always. But the act of showing up really does something. And then there are those meetings that are just like, whoa, that was That was so helpful,
Yep.
so good.
For sure.
And we all feel like we know each other better, but also we want to encourage each
Yep.
other more. And it's really an incredible thing when that happens.
And getting back to the Bonhoeffer idea, we just set our groups up for failure, and when we put too many expectations on the group and other people in the group.
Yeah.
And you can have the same people in the same community group, but there's something I think that the Spirit of God does at times to open people up more. And so the same people who you couldn't pry open their mouth to get a sentence out of, the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, maybe a year from that point, might be confessing sin of some sort to the group with tears being shed, right?
Yeah.
And so it's showing up and being faithful with the people that God has given you in the group. That's how transformation happens. That's how relationships grow.
Yeah. And I mean, I'll commend you. I'm excited about how our groups are growing, and we're adding more groups that whole bit. And I think you have a good process that leaders walk through and
Hopefully.
become leaders. No, I think you're doing a good job of
Yeah.
really thinking that through well. And so it's safe to walk into these groups.
Yeah.
We're doing the work to do that, because you can walk in and it's not going to be demanded of you that you suddenly like bare your soul.
Yep.
But
Or have all the Bible knowledge.
yeah,
in the
no,
world.
not at
Yeah.
all. Like, this is a very much anybody can show up and feel comfortable
Yep.
and safe
Exactly.
and good. One last question, then I want to finish up, is seasons. Sometimes there's just different time periods. Like young kids is one situation, older kids is another, and no kids is another. I mean, and all these pieces. I'm curious, how does that influence how you think about this stuff?
Yeah. I mean, we have a 2-year-old.
Yep.
And we've got another one on the way.
Which we're super excited about. Yeah.
So this last season, because we do our community groups seasonally, right? Fall,
Yeah.
spring, sometimes in summer. It's up to the group leaders. And we had 3 kids in our group. The oldest was 4, then a 2-year-old, then a 10-month-old.
Yep.
And we had a babysitter, but like the kids are coming upstairs
They
bugging
totally
us.
are.
They totally are. And going into this next season, we were going to be adding 2 more kids to the group, and then the following season be another kid, because we've got another on the way. And Devin and I, my wife and I, just decided, hey, you know what? I think for the sake of the group, for this season, this fall at least, we are going to take a break as a couples group and do individual men's and women's groups with the same people, inviting them into the group, but also inviting others in, because we're all just going to be disappointed.
No, totally, right? That's absolutely true. And it'll be really interesting. I'm super curious to hear how that goes.
And that changes as kids get older and kids can begin to own community groups, and look forward to being a part of it. Yeah. Whether not that they're a part of the, for lack of a better word, adult discussion, but they get to see their friends, they get to see their friends' parents, all that. They can kind of feel like it's their own community group as well. Yeah. But then, there are people who don't have kids, maybe are empty nesters, or maybe are single. And so there are community groups for people at completely different seasons of life.
Yeah. I think that over the course of this conversation, you've already pitched a dozen things and dozen reasons why somebody would want to be part of something like this. Yeah. But if you're to say, like, hey, if you're on the fence right now, what's the like nugget thing that you would say, hey, what do they have to lose? Like that kind of a comment. What would you want them to know?
I mean, you can always go the first time and then never go back.
This is true. This is so true.
You've got that option, right? Sign up. If you don't like it, wait for the next season and try again. Yeah. Saying that kind of lightheartedly, jokingly, but I think you have very little to lose and everything to gain. Christianity is not a solo sport. There's this book his name's Joseph Hellerman. He wrote a book called When the Church Was a Family. Not going to remember the quote, but he essentially says, like, through the messiness of community, through the ups and downs, through the times when you don't want to talk to another person, to the times that you want to spend every minute with them, right? It's being in relationship with people in the church over the long haul that causes people to grow. Yeah. And the people who don't stay in a church, who, for lack of a better term, church hop or are looking for that idealized version of community, they stay stagnant. They do not grow. And so I would just say, if people want to grow, get into a community group. You might not experience the growth that you expect. You might experience it on a lesser degree, but you also might experience something that you never expected to find in a community group. So I would just say, if you want to grow in representing Jesus well, a community group is where you do that.
Yeah. I think that's really good. We're in a sign up period right now. So we're in September 2024. Sign up. So if you're listening now, I mean, the next number of weeks we'll have a chance for you to sign up. So I encourage you to do that. And if you're listening from afar, I mean, you don't need to do that with groups here at this church. Like there's all kinds of places to jump into a group.
Try to do it with groups here.
Do it in a group that's nearby.
Yeah.
But also it also can be just a few group of friends, right? Like let's not try and like do the there's a way for you to say, hey, these few friends I'm going to get together with on a regular basis. We're going to ask hard questions. Yep. There's something powerful and that happens when we do that. And that's the kind of finishing note I want to end on is the powerful part is we don't need community to survive. We talked about this.
Yep.
But I think that there is a profoundly more authentic, deep, full, all the words, way of living
for sure
that happens, that you experience the hard parts with people and you can mourn when people mourn.
Yep.
And you can rejoice when people rejoice. And something about joy is that when you share it, it expands.
Yeah.
There's not a limited supply.
Yep.
And you get to be part of that with people. And
for sure.
Don't miss out on that.
I mean, some of my favorite times at church on a Sunday morning, we talk to a lot of people on Sunday mornings, right? If I'm just being frank, there is a different emotional response that I get when I see somebody from my community group coming through the doors. Yeah. I haven't seen them in a week or I haven't seen them since community group. There's just something fun and exciting and joyful, like you said, about checking in with them because I know them on a deeper level than I do the other people that come through the doors. And so I think Louis Giglio said this at his church. He said, it's hard to be lost in the crowd when you're found in, they call them circles. Sure. So I would say it's hard to be lost here at RCC when you're found in a community group. Yeah. And so we do this thing on Sundays, right? We sit under God's word. We worship together. But I would argue the more full experience of what the church is happens in community group through this back and forth dialogue, living life together. Yeah, that's really good. For all of you who are listening, thanks for coming in and listening for a little bit. Thanks, Adam, for chatting for a while. Having me on here. Yeah, we appreciate it. And we'll be back in a couple weeks with something else, and we can't wait for that. So sounds good. Awesome. Have a good one, everybody.